All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So, folks, here we are. The start of a new college football season is right around the corner. Last night was all about my top 25 heading into this new season. Tonight, it's all about things in the Big Ten Conference. And of course, we've seen the Big Ten claim the national championship in each of the last 3 years. And maybe they are about to get on a run, kind of like what we saw from the Southeastern Conference during the BCS era. Each of the last 3 years, or 2 years rather, in the 12 team playoff, we've seen the Big Ten get three teams. Will we see the Big Ten get even more teams in this year's CFP? But nonetheless, winning the Big Ten is an accomplishment in itself because you're talking about an 18 team league. Some of the heavyweights in the sport of college football reside in this conference, and it is very easy to get lost in the shuffle in this league. You look at Ohio State, and okay, I talked about this last night in my top 25. Ohio State, they were rolling throughout the regular season last year, got to the Big Ten title game, lost a tight one to Indiana. And then, of course, everybody was like, okay, they stubbed their toe against the Hoosiers. They're going to get it going in the CFP. And, of course, there they were one and done, courtesy of Miami. But nonetheless, Ohio State is still Ohio State. And with that said, they are once again going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten. You look at Julian Sayin at quarterback, Jeremiah Smith. You cannot say enough good things about this guy's ability at wide receiver. Bo Jackson, I think, is set for stardom at running back, not to be confused with the Bo Jackson from another generation. Ohio State did lose a ton of talent defensively to the National Football League, but guess what? You don't recruit backups at Ohio State. You recruit guys who are ready to take over and get into that starting role. And I think Ohio State will not skip a beat defensively. For me, I'm looking at that September 12th game between the Buckeyes and the Longhorns. And of course, last year we saw Texas go to Columbus as the number one ranked team in the nation, and they could not hang with Ohio State. And I say that because this Ohio State defense really flexed their muscles on Texas. Will things be different this time around in Austin? September 26th, Ohio State will welcome the Illini to Columbus. Big one on the 17th of October, as we're going to see Ohio State travel to Bloomington to take on Indiana. So basically, the last two national championship teams are going to square off. Halloween, we're going to see Ohio State travel to Los Angeles to take on USC. They then get Oregon at home on the following Saturday, and of course, finishing up at home at the Horseshoe against Michigan. You got to once again keep your eye out for Oregon. Of course, we saw the Ducks win the Big Ten in their first year in this conference. They only lost one conference game last year. And of course, the Ducks, it's been a seamless transition for them so far from Pac-12 to Big Ten. And I think Oregon is once again going to be in the mix to win this conference. You got Dante Moore, like I said before, easily could have left school last year. All right. Came back. The NIL money is good. He could have been a first-round pick last year, but I think he's coming back to really season his skills, if you will, for the National Football League. Oregon always runs the football effectively under Dan Lanning. Look out for a big season for running back Jordan Davidson. I like wide receiver Jeremiah McClellan. You've got a very experienced offensive line for the Ducks. And then I love this defense for Oregon. You cannot say enough about the playmakers in their secondary, as well as defensive end Mateo Uiagalelei and linebacker Tatum Tuioti. I'm looking at this Ducks schedule. September 5th, they get Boise State at home. September 26th, they're at USC. October 24th, they're at Illinois. Cross-country trip to Champaign to take on the Illini. The big one that I just mentioned on the 7th of November, they're at Ohio State. And then they follow that up by welcoming Michigan to Eugene. And speaking of Michigan, it's the Kyle Whittingham show now in Ann Arbor. Of course, Kyle Whittingham was kind of nudged out the door at Utah. Now he has a revival for himself with the maize and blue. I think that this Michigan team is tailor made, talent wise, for someone like Kyle Whittingham. He loves those dual threat quarterbacks. You have one in Bryce Underwood. We know that Michigan loves to run the football. Jordan Marshall is going to have a big time impact, I think, in this Michigan offense. And then this defense. Getting John Henry Daly to come over from Utah with Kyle Whittingham was big. John Henry Daly, to me, could have gone to the NFL last year. Okay, 11 and a half sacks last year for the Utes en route to being an All-American. He has the potential to be the Big Ten newcomer of the year this time around. Michigan has a very tough schedule. Okay, they get Oklahoma at home. They get Penn State at home in October, which is followed by a trip or a visit, rather, should I say, from Indiana on the following week. And then you look at that November slate for the Wolverines. They're home for Michigan State. They're then at Oregon on the 14th. And then, of course, they finish up in Columbus against the Buckeyes. The Fighting Illini, they've won 19 games over the last 2 years. Can Brett Bielema and company take that next step, though, to be a playoff team? You've got to replace Luke Altmaier at quarterback. They brought in former East Carolina signal caller Caton Hauser. The Illini, and this is hard to believe with a Brett Bielema coach team, that they were so ineffective running the football last year. Illinois was 89th in the nation. You do have a veteran defense for the Illini, as all 11 starters on that side of the football are either seniors or juniors. You look at some key games on Illinois' schedule. They're at Ohio State on the 26th of September. They're home for Oregon on the 24th of November. And then their last two games of the season, home for Iowa, and then on the 28th of November, they're taking on Northwestern in Chicago at Wrigley. So you've got not only the defending Big Ten champs, but also the defending national champions. And I'm talking about Indiana. Of course, it was a dream season last year. You can't say enough about what Curt Cignetti has done so far in Bloomington with this team. 27-2 over the last 2 years. You've got to replace Fernando Mendoza at quarterback. They're bringing in former TCU quarterback Josh Hoover. But like I said last night in my top 25, Indiana has so much to replace on this offense. As aside from Fernando Mendoza, they lost more than 2,000 yards on the ground last year in Roman Hemby and Kalen Black, who are both in the National Football League. I still like this Indiana defense, okay? You've got Elijah Hardy. You have Isaiah Jones. You have Tyreek Tucker. And then you have Jamari Sharp in that secondary as well. The Indiana is the real deal, okay? And I think people realize that by now. Curt Cignetti is going to have to coach this team up again, because everybody's going to be gunning for them because they're the champs. And since they not only are they the champs, they went 16-0 last year. Everybody wants to be that team now to beat Indiana. A decade ago, nobody would have been saying that, okay? But nonetheless, they get the Buckeyes at home on the 17th of October, which is then followed by a trip to Ann Arbor on the 24th of October to take on Michigan. And then they get SC at home on November 14th. So a somewhat favorable schedule for the Hoosiers this year. Speaking of the men of Troy, it's been a frustrating time for the fan base of USC, okay? They want to see this team get back on that national stage. SC is yet to get to the college football playoff, whether it was a 14 playoff or now the 12-team playoff. Lincoln Riley is set to begin his 5th year as the head coach of USC. And we've seen SC be on the cusp, but they can't break through. Last year, USC finished 4th in the Big Ten. They were 7-2. Okay, 2 tough losses, of course. The out-of-conference loss to Notre Dame as well knocked them out of CFP contention. I think SC needs to really try to go out there and take care of their business on the road this year, which is something they didn't always do last year. They have the talent on offense, and it starts with senior quarterback Jaden Mayava. Losing D coordinator Danton Lynn to Penn State is big, but like I said, they're getting former TCU head coach Gary Patterson to be their new D coordinator, and he's got talent to work with on that side of the ball. You look at Christian Pierce in the secondary at free safety. You look at defensive end Cameron Crawford, and then you look at middle linebacker Desmond Stevens II. For me with SC, like I said, they get Oregon at home on the 26th of September. They're at Penn State on the 10th of October. They get Ohio State on Halloween, and then they're at Indiana on the 14th of November. You wanted to go to the Big Ten. You wanted more money if you're USC, but you also wanted to deal with these big games. The opportunities are right there for this UST team. Will they make the most of it this season? For Penn State, it's a new era in Happy Valley, as this is going to be the first time since 2013 that James Franklin is not leading this team out of the tunnel at Beaver Stadium. He's at Virginia Tech now. So in steps former Iowa State head coach Matt Campbell. And one thing that we know about Matt Campbell from his time with the Cyclones, he knew how to do more with less. But the expectations have changed here at now that he's at Penn State. You look at it, James Franklin took a lot of his guys that he recruited to Virginia Tech. So, of course, with the trend right now, the transfer portal, when a coach moves, he brings a lot of his guys with him. And Matt Campbell is bringing a ton of talent with him from Iowa State. Let's see how all of that talent is going to be able to get acclimated from the Big 12 to now the Big 10. You've got Rocco Becht, who's coming over at quarterback. You've got Carson Hansen, who's coming over at running back. And you got several players, which includes Chase Soule and Brett Eskelsen at wide receiver, who are also coming over from Iowa State. You get Danton Lynn now as your defensive coordinator if you are Penn State. You have Caleb Bacon at middle linebacker, who's also coming over from Iowa State. It's an Iowa State theme at Penn State this year. I'm looking at Penn State, and it's transition time. I think they're going to have some bumps in the road as they transition to Matt Campbell's way of doing things at Penn State, but they're still going to be a formidable squad this year in the Big Ten Conference. For Minnesota, rather, we've seen them go 8-5 in consecutive years, but can this team under head coach PJ Fleck, try to find a way to take that next step in this tough league? You've got Drake Lindsey, a quarterback who threw 18 touchdowns last year as a freshman. You have 3 seniors on the offensive line for the Golden Gophers. You have a lot of talent defensively, which includes Anthony Smith at defensive end, who could be one of, if not the top edge rusher in this conference. Also keep an eye out for cornerback John Nestor as a playmaker in this secondary. Minnesota goes to Washington on the 26th of September. They host Michigan on the 3rd of October. They're at Indiana on Halloween, and then they're at Penn State on the 14th of November. For Washington, very interesting team, okay, as things are really starting to take place for the Huskies under head coach Jedd Fisch. You look at UW last year. They went 9-4, 5-4 in this league. Controversy right now, okay, because Damon Williams said he was coming back to Washington to play quarterback, signed his NIL deal, and tried to back out of it. And the University of Washington said, you know what, not so fast, young man. And once he found out that he's going to have to give back money, he decided to stay. So now you got to wonder if everybody's going to make nice and be on the same page for this Huskies program coming into this season. With Damon Williams, there's a lot of talent on this football team. You look at Desmond Roebuck at wide receiver. You got 3 seniors on his offensive line for the Huskies. You have a Washington defense that was 21st in the nation last year. Keep an eye out for strong safety Alex McLaughlin, as well as outside linebacker Zaire Alexander. I'm looking at the Huskies. They're at USC on October the 3rd, and this was always a big game in the Pac-12. It's going to be a big game now in the Big Ten. They get Penn State at home on the 7th of November. They get Indiana coming cross country on the 21st of November. And you cannot underscore what some of these Big Ten teams in the Midwest and the East are going to have to deal with going west to take on some of these teams from that formerly of the Pac-12. And then, of course, Washington finishes up on the road in Eugene against Oregon. Iowa, what can you say under Kurt Ferentz? They always continue to be a thorn in the side of the top teams in the Big Ten. Not going to be as easy for Iowa to get to the Big Ten championship game. No more Big Ten West as the Hawkeyes are opened up to all of the tough competition in this league. But one thing for Kurt Ferentz, you know that his teams always come to play. Keep an eye out for middle linebacker Jaden Montgomery, and Iowa always has a tough defense under Kurt Ferentz. I think that is definitely going to keep them in the mix this year. For Maryland, some people wanted the school to move on from Mike Locksley as a head coach last year. I understand why they didn't do it because they were worried about losing some recruits. And then, of course, right now, more than ever in the college football world, the buyout money, having to pay these big buyouts to head coaches and then having to turn around and get somebody else to be your head coach is not financially savvy for a lot of these programs. But you look at Maryland last year. They won their first four. They dropped their final 8 games of the season. But there's talent there. Okay. You have Malik Washington at quarterback, had a strong freshman year, threw 17 touchdowns. Of course, Maryland is hopeful that he can build off of that. You do have a veteran offensive line for the Terps. They've got nothing but juniors and seniors starting. We need to see something out of this Maryland defense, and there's talent there. Defensive end Sidney Stewart had 7 sacks last year as a freshman. You have senior middle linebacker Daniel Wingate, and you also have Jamari Glasker in that secondary. Maryland has some interesting games, and let's see how they shape up against some of the top teams in the Big Ten this year. They're at Ohio State on the 10th of October. They're home for Illinois on Halloween. They're at USC on the 21st of November, and then they finish up at home against Penn State. I keep saying this about Rutgers. You know, sometimes it looks like they're just simply there for the paycheck in the Big Ten Conference. They're basically the little engine that could. Okay, they just don't match up talent wise in this league. We knew this was going to happen when Rutgers joined the Big Ten. They brought the New York market with them, and of course, the Big Ten cut them a check. And I think it's going to be another long football season in Piscataway for the Scarlet Knights. For Nebraska, okay, for the first time since the days of Bo Pelini, they're actually entering a season coming off of consecutive winning seasons. And it's been a while since Bo Pelini coached his team. Okay, but the folks in Lincoln, they've got to be tired of seeing their beloved Cornhuskers simply be a mediocre football team. No conference titles for Big Red since they joined the Big Ten. And their last trip to a conference championship game came back in 2012, excuse me. They have not finished with a winning record within the Big Ten since 2016. Nebraska is another one of those schools that some people expected them to get off of their head coach after last season, but they decided to stick with Matt Rule in spite of the fact that he's 19-19 so far at Nebraska. And of course, like I said, with Mike Locksley at Maryland, a lot of that has to do with the buyouts. So we saw Nebraska lose quarterback Dylan Raiola in the transfer portal. He decided to go to Oregon, and he's basically the backup for Dante Moore because some people expected Dante Moore to leave, but he's back. So Raiola is just basically there getting that NIL money at Oregon and being the backup. So, of course, Nebraska had to go to the transfer portal. They got former UNLV quarterback Anthony Calandria, who threw 23 touchdowns last year for the Rebels. Keep an eye out defensively for middle linebacker Vincent Shavers Jr., but Nebraska is still going to be fighting an uphill battle to stay up in the Big Ten. For Northwestern, they've got to be excited going into their new renovated stadium, Ryan Field. You bring in former Michigan State quarterback Aiden Childs. But I look at this Northwestern team. They've got 6 seniors starting on defense. They want to try to make it 3 winning seasons in the last 10 years, or 4 years rather. but it's not going to be easy for the Wildcats. They have their hands full. Very, very interesting and tough schedule. They're at Indiana in September, followed by a visit from Penn State on the 2nd of October. They're at Oregon on Halloween. They're at Ohio State on the 14th of November, and then they get the Illini at Wrigley Field to finish the regular season campaign. UCLA was another one of those teams that's bringing in a new head coach as they hired Bob Chesney away from James Madison. And of course, the last time that we saw a Big Ten team hire a James Madison head coach, it was just a couple of years ago when Indiana hired Kurt Signetti. So, of course, the Bruins are hopeful for that same success. UCLA's last conference championship, believe it or not, was all the way back in 1998 in the Pac-10. And since that time, they've had themselves 10 different head coaches and only 3 10-win seasons. First thing that Bob Chesney has to do, he's got to get more out of this UCLA offense, which was 120th in the nation a year ago. We saw UCLA last offseason spend a ton of money to get quarterback Nico Iamaleava away from Tennessee. He underperformed last year. The Bruins are going to need more out of him. One thing that we've also seen with this trend when coaches go to a new program, like I said, they bring a lot of their guys with them. And we're seeing Bob Chesney bring a lot of guys from James Madison to UCLA, which includes running back Wayne Knight, tight end Josh Pfeiffer, and right guard Carter Swayze on that offensive line. Defensively, the Bruins have to get better as well. They were only 86th in the nation last year, but keep an eye out for cornerback Scooter Jackson, as well as defensive end Sahir West, who is another one of those players who left James Madison to go to UCLA with Bob Chesney. I think one thing for the Bruins is this. They're going to start the year slow, but as the year progresses, they are not going to want to, they're not going to be a team that people want to face in the Big Ten. I think finally that UCLA has finally gotten it right at head coach. For Purdue, over the last 3 years, we've only seen them win 7 games. Barry Odom is definitely hopeful that that changes this year in West Lafayette. Purdue last year was the only team within the Big Ten that did not win a conference game. We saw the Boilermakers win their first 2 games of the season before they dropped their last 10. And in the bulk of those games, they were not competitive, as only 2 of those defeats were by less than 10 points. They've got to improve on offense. They were 102nd in the nation. You have Ryan Brown coming back at quarterback. But nonetheless, I think Purdue is once again fighting an uphill battle in the Big Ten. Then you've got Wisconsin. And like it was with Nebraska, like it was with Maryland, some people wanted to see Wisconsin get off of Luke Fickell as the head coach. But again, the money that was involved. So they brought him back for 2026. For the Badgers, it's hard to believe, okay? But they are coming off of consecutive losing seasons for the first time since 1992. And that was just before Barry Alvarez really got things rolling in Madison. Only Massachusetts had less yards or fewer yards per game on offense last year than Wisconsin. That is not good company to be in. The Badgers were only able to score 20 points or more in a game twice last season. You bring in former Old Dominion quarterback Colton Joseph, who was the Sun Belt Conference's Offensive Player of the Year in 2025. You bring in former Iowa State running back Abu Sama. Defensively, I think the Badgers are going to be able to stay in games. But again, will they have enough offense, and will Luke Fickell be able to do enough to keep his job? And then finally, there's Michigan State. And of course, they swung and missed on bringing Jonathan Smith over from Oregon State. So now you bring in another head coach who left his alma mater for different reasons. This time it was Pat Fitzgerald. And of course, Pat Fitzgerald was an All-American linebacker at Northwestern. He coached the team for 17 years, was 110 and 101 at his alma mater, was one of those guys who knew how to do more with less in Evanston. But the expectations are going to be higher in East Lansing because they want to see Michigan State turn the corner and once again be among the top teams in the Big Ten. Michigan State is definitely going to take their lumps this season as Pat Fitzgerald tries to establish things and build his program. But let's see how this team looks in a year or so under Coach Fitzgerald. So when it's all said and done, I'm looking at this 18-team league. It's going to once again be tough. And of course, we're going to see multiple bids as to be expected for the CFP. I think Ohio State is going to be in the mix to win the Big Ten, as is Oregon. Michigan could be very interesting under head coach Kyle Whittingham. I think USC and Indiana are two teams to watch as well in this conference. But when it's all said and done, I think we're looking at an Ohio State Oregon showdown for the Big Ten championship. So basically, the 2024 winner and the 2025 loser of the championship game. Two teams that are consistently in the mix to win this league, two teams that are consistently in the mix to get to the college football playoff. But I think Ohio State plays with a chip on their shoulder all season long after the way that their season ended a year ago. And because of that, I like the Buckeyes. So much talent there on this squad for head coach Ryan Day. And I'm rolling with Ohio State to win the Big Ten here in 2026. But folks, that is going to wrap it up for this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning in. As I break it down and continue my breakdowns for the upcoming college football season, definitely be sure to stay tuned to this channel tomorrow, as I will be talking all things for the Southeastern Conference. But in regards to this podcast, if you like what you heard and saw, folks, you know what to do. Just hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. And like I always say, it is greatly appreciated. Also, if you are on the X, formerly known as Twitter, you can check me out anytime at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you give me that follow, it will be my pleasure to do the same in return. And that also goes for Instagram, where you can check me out at 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge. Also, if you are on Facebook, definitely be sure to check out the Sports Depot 365. And it's like I always say, one of the better sports groups going on social media. Hey, what's going on, man? OGD, you're saying USC all the way. Well, I want to see what the men of Troy do this year under head coach Lincoln Riley. They've been close, okay? They've been close, and I really want to see if USC breaks through this year. Maybe not to win the Big Ten, but definitely getting through to the college football playoff. And it's one of those where it's been far too long since USC has been on that big stage, my friend. So let's see if this will definitely be the year. But until next time, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I'm signing off. And I'm saying thanks once again for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.